Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Srimad Bhagavatam. As we were saying earlier on, it's the first Shishikodantai Mahaprashashiki, first anniversary of the disappearance of our friend Omio. And for those who don't know him, he was a very dedicated devotee. He used to chant the Gajendra Moksha Stotram every day for like at least the last 40 years of his life. He got many other people to chant that as well, word for word. It's from the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. First met him in Aberdeen in 1988. We were doing Harinam, and he's from Bengal, and he couldn't believe his eyes because when he came to the West, he was a teacher in Robert Gordon University. Actually, when he came, he just expected he'd have to fit in with the Western people, and his his faith, his culture, his practices would maybe have to be left behind, and he'd just have to do it in very private situation. But when seeing the devotees, he couldn't believe his eyes, and immediately he came and met us, and we were living in a caravan just outside Aberdeen, and he came for the Sunday program, and he was so excited. He wrote 3 checks that day. He says, "There's one for the temple, there's one for Rath Yatra, that's one for the devotees." And yeah, so he had all of Prabhupada's books, but especially he liked that pastime of the liberation of Gajendra the elephant. And there's a special benediction that by reciting that every day, then one receives the same destination as Gajendra, which means enter into the Lord's pastime. So we're sure that he did, because he was such a devoted person, very austere, dedicated devotee. So, although we're sad to lose him, we're sure that he's Krishna's happy to have him back. So we'll just have a short reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. This is a condensed version. He built a house in which the whole world can live. And this chapter is called Planting the Seed. Swamiji then sat with his friends, eating the same prasadam as they, with the addition of a banana and a metal bowl full of hot milk. He would slice the banana by push it down against the edge of the bowl, letting the slices fall into the hot milk. Bhaktivedanta Swami's open decree that everyone should eat as much prasadam as possible created a humorous mood and a family feeling. No one was allowed simply to sit picking at his food, nibbling politely. Did anyone ever discover that when they came to the temple at first? If Hoksha doesn't mind me recalling, he says when he came to Chaitanya College and they were serving at prasadam, it was a big plate like that, and he was thinking that everybody on the table was going to eat from it. And no, that's just for you. So the non-devotees don't know what they're missing, do they? Yeah, it was some of the plates we had, not so much here, but some of the plates we had as back then, they were like dustbin lids, and they were heaped up. And devotees would play tricks on each other. Sometimes if someone looked away, you'd pile some prasadam on their plate, and they're like, wow, this is ever increasing. Prabhupada says, eat up to the neck for the first 6 months. Some of us are still on the first 6 months. We must have thought it was like 6 months of the demigods or something. So if he saw someone not eating heartily, he would call the person's name and smilingly protest, why are you not eating? Take prasadam. And he would laugh. When I was coming to your country on a boat, he said, I thought, how will the Americans ever eat this food? And as the boys pushed their plates forward for more, Keith would serve seconds more rice, dal, chapatis, and sabji. After all, it was spiritual. You're supposed to eat a lot. It would purify you. It would free you from Maya. Besides, it was good, delicious, spicy. This was better than American food. It was like chanting. It was far out. You got high from eating this food. They ate with the right hand, Indian style. Keith and Howard had already learned this and had even tasted similar dishes. But as they told the Swami and a room full of believers, the food in India had never been this good. One boy, Stanley, was quite young, and Swamiji, almost like a doting father, watched over him as he ate. Stanley's mother had personally met Swamiji and said that only if he took personal care of her son would she allow him to live in the monastery. Swamiji complied. He diligently encouraged the boy until Stanley gradually took on a voracious appetite and began eating 10 chapatis at a sitting, and would have taken more had Swamiji not told him to stop. We used to have competitions as well as Baptists to see how many plates of porridge you could eat in the morning. So if you want to have some competitions, you better tell the cooks. But aside from Swamiji's limiting Stanley to 10 chapatis, the word was always more, take more. When Swamiji was finished, he would rise and leave the room. Keith would catch a couple of volunteers to help him clean, and the others would leave. Srila Prabhupada ki. It's interesting how it was 26th 2nd Avenue, isn't it? That was the address. It was a shop front, and Stanley's mother was referring to it as the monastery. It's funny, the devotees they can turn anything into, a spiritual place of pilgrimage. Actually, before we had Karuna Bhavan, we lived in a motorhome in a caravan park to the east of Edinburgh, and it was effulgent because there was so much yoga going on. The devotees would get up, chant their rounds, have class, go out in Sankirtan all day, and come back, and sometimes have a program, and that's what was going. And when we had to sell it, we felt like, oh, this is wrong. We can't sell this motorhome. It's been used in Krishna's service. But of course, it wasn't practical to keep everything that you ever used in Krishna's service, like some kind of collector. But this is the nature of devotional service. That the pure devotee, he turns places into a tirtha. He makes places into a place of pilgrimage. Which verse is it? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 2, entitled A Jamil delivered by the Vishnu Dutas, text 39. Iti Jata Sunirveda. Iti Jata Sunirveda. Kshana Sangena Sadhushu Shana Sangena Sadhushu Gangadwaram Upeyaya Gangadwaram Upeyaya Mukta Sarvanubandana Mukta Sarvanubandana Iti Jata Sunirveda Shana Sangena Sadhushu Gangadwaram Upeyaya Mukta Sarvanubandana Iti Jata Sunirveda Kshana Sangena Sadhushu Gangadwaram Upeyaya Mukta Sarvanubandana Iti Jata Sunirveda Kshana Sangena Sadhushu Gangadwaram Upeyaya Mukta Sarvanubandana. Please chant.
Gangadvaram Upeyaya Sarvanubandana
Ladies. Iti thus Jata Sunirveda Ajamil, who had become detached from the material conception of life. Kshana Sangena, by a moment's association, Sadhushu, with devotees, Gangadwaram, to Hardwar, Haridwara, the doorway to Hari, because the Ganges begins there. Hardwar is also called Gangadwar. Upeyaya went Mukta, being freed from Sarva Anubandana, all kinds of material bondage. Translation: because of a moment's association with devotees, the Vishnudutas, Jamil detached himself from material conception of life with determination. Thus freed from all material attraction, he immediately started for Hardwar. Please repeat: because of a moment's association with devotees, Vishnudutas, Ajamil detached himself from the material conception of life with determination. Thus freed from all material attraction, he immediately started for Hardwar. Purport: the word Mukta Sarvanubandana indicates that After this incident, Ajamil, not caring for his wife and children, went straight to Hardwar for further advancement in his spiritual life. Our Krishna conscious movement now has centers in Vrindavan and Navadvip, so that those who want to live a retired life, whether they be devotees or not, can go there and with determination give up the bodily concept of life. One is welcome to live in those places for the rest of his life in order to achieve the highest success by the very simple method of chanting the holy name of the Lord and taking prasad. Thus one may return home back to Godhead. We do not have a centre in Hardwar, but Vrindavan and Sri Mayapur are better for devotees than any other places. The Chaitanya Chandrodaya temple offers one a good opportunity to associate with devotees. Let us all take advantage of this opportunity. Okay, let's go. Om Gyanatamanandasya Gyanjanaksalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Garam Yat Kripatamam Bande Shri Garam Dinataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Because of a moment's association with devotees, the Vishnudutas, Jamil detached himself from the material conception of life with determination. Thus freed from all material attraction, he immediately started for Hardwar. What's the Sanskrit word or words for a moment's association with devotee? Lavamatra. A moment. How long is a moment? 1/12 of a second. Interesting, isn't it? That someone can actually calculate such a thing. It must be in a very high level of consciousness to actually be able to detect the duration of a moment. So this very important lesson here. Jamil has he's recognized his good fortune, not good fortune, unparalleled great fortune, that he was about to be punished for having lived a very sinful life, but he got the moment's association with the devotees, and as was mentioned in the previous verse, simply because I chanted the holy name of the Lord in association with devotees, my heart is now becoming purified. So this is a very important thing. Sometimes people think, well, let me just go and chant in solitude. And Prabhupada was never in favor of that. And certainly he was in favor of devotees chanting a lot. He said minimum 16 rounds on the beads, unlimited off the beads. And this is also in keeping with Lord Krishna's instruction in the Bhagavad Gita, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam. Always chant my glories, always chant my name. And this is the perfect way to remember Krishna, because by chanting Krishna's name, then Krishna is there. Even sometimes when we do it unconsciously, like Jamil, he was chanting, not calling out for Krishna, but because Krishna is so merciful, he accepted that service of Ajamil, that he was chanting his name. And in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada talks about this, even if one chants unconsciously, even to the extent that perhaps they say one syllable of a name in a sentence, and then later on in the sentence they say another part of it, and Krishna accepts that as chanting. It is Krishna's mercy. He wants to benefit the living entities. Just like when Putana came, her intention was ill intention to poison baby Krishna, and Krishna being Ajit, unconquerable, and she had no chance to do that. She didn't know that, but Krishna thought, oh, here's someone coming, here's my mother coming to offer me some service. So he accepted the service. Of course, to the external person, we see that Krishna, they might see that Krishna killed this person, but Krishna, he gave liberation. And so seems like liberation is not so difficult to achieve if Krishna wants to give that. But what's more important than liberation? I remember one devotee, Pushkar. Some of you may know a devotee called Pushkar, a very famous artist, and he's very straightforward way of preaching. And one time he was talking about impersonalists in class, and he said they're simply interested in liberation. So it was like, it's almost this like, sense gratification, liberation. What's the difference? And it's a fact because Prabhupada refers to this impersonal liberation as the last snare of Maya. So just like sometimes people set these snares, like traps, and they capture animals. Even sometimes these hunters get caught in their own traps because they forget where they put them or something. And then once they're caught in that, unless somebody releases them, they've no chance of getting out. So Srila Prabhupada, Nevashesha Shunyavadi Pascha Tyade Shatarane, he's come to release us from this snare of Maya. The devotees were asking, Prabhupada, you're often talking about these Mayavadis, the impersonalists, and they said, but who are they? We don't see any here in the West. It says, no, you are the impersonalists. You're the Mayavadis. Prabhupada was very kind. He wasn't saying, you're Mayavadis, you're impersonalists. Because if we look at any Western philosophy or Western religion, then it is based on the teachings of, so in the original, for example, take the Christian faith, they had different persons representing it and philosophers who were thinking how to present this to the masses. And it was Origen, the philosopher Origen, who his philosophy was actually one which was carrying the Christian teaching. And it was basically impersonalistic conception of the absolute truth, which is a conception of the Lord Brahman, Paramatma Bhagwan. What's that verse again? Brahmatmi, Paramatmi, Bhagavanti Subjache. So Brahman is the first level of God realization, so it is a level of realization, but it's not the final goal. It's not the highest resting place for the soul. And Paramatma then introduces the personal aspect of the Lord beyond the blinding effulgence, just like Ishupanishad, Hiranmayena Patrena, Satya Shapetam Mukam, Tatam Prashant Apavrinu, Satya Dharmaya Drishtaye. The Lord's devotee is praying, my dear Lord, please remove your dazzling effulgence so that I can see your real form. So this dazzling effulgence used to be a band in the 70s. They sang a song called Blinded by the Light. So this is the Mayavadis, they're blinded by the light. They can't see the form of the Lord. Just like if you look into a light bulb, a bright light bulb, you won't see the bulb, you'll just be blinded by that light. You see the energy coming from it. So the Brahman is the energy emanating from the Lord that is one of the Lord's, it's the Lord's effulgence, and that is emanating from the Lord's personal form. And this is, so this impersonalism is very deep rooted in us, and so much so that we don't even recognize it ourselves. Sometimes the way we treat each other, or the way we approach our Krishna consciousness, we're treating Krishna like some kind of either material benefactor, or that we simply want to enjoy Krishna's presence. But the mood of the devotee is simply there for Krishna's enjoyment. Just like recently we did one event at Bhaktivedanta Manor, and there's one famous personality there, Boy George, who came and he explained to Jayadev, who was organizing the event, he says that I just want to please the devotees. So his mood was there, and you could see that that's what he was wanting to do. The songs which he chose, he spoke about them in between. He was explaining this Krishna conscious connection, and he finished his set off with chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, came off the stage and went in amongst the devotees. He just wanted to be amongst the devotees. He said that, I really need Krishna in my life. I need a bit of Krishna in my life. So this is good to see that this attitude of wanting to be in the association of devotees, wanting to please the devotees, this is the way we can get Krishna's mercy. So he's got the right idea. And of course, this is something we try to practice every day. And sometimes we forget it every day. But Just in the previous verse here, Srila Prabhupada was talking, no, it was actually in the verse itself, this false conception of I and mine. So this is the material conception of life. I, me, and mine. Everything is related to me. This is mine. And if possible, everything I see will be mine, unless it's going to bring me some blame or some kind of infamy or something like that. We're attached to the fame and the glory, but we don't want the other side of the coin. We just want heads all the time. We don't want tails. But this is the material world. When we identify with something and we don't know what we're getting entangled in, then we have to identify with the reaction when that comes as well. We have to be accountable. We are accountable. Whether we accept it or not, we're accountable. And this is also where the devotee's suffering actually reduces. When we become accountable and we become responsible, then we think, yeah, I'm actually due more. I'm only getting this. It's simply a token reaction. Or we can say, I'm such a fool. I remember one devotee, Harikesh Swami, at the time, he said, if you tell some materialistic person you're such a fool, they think, who do you think you are? Let's fight. Or they argue with you. But if you tell the devotee, you're a fool, then this devotee, you think, thank you very much. So sometimes this is a good way to gauge yourself. If someone points out how foolish we are, we shouldn't be immediately defensive. This is the material condition that without even thinking about it, we just defend, isn't it? Ever do that, anybody? We just defend without even thinking, is this person saying something correct? Is it correct what they're saying? And even if I think it's not, could it be that I just don't see it? So the way to test our advancement also is whenever someone points something out for our improvement in Krishna consciousness, then we should be grateful. If we're not grateful, or it takes some time, if it takes some period of time, then that's how much advancement we still have to make. The sooner we can accept some direction which is favorable. So what's the basic principle of Krishna consciousness? Accept and exactly. So if our basis for our life, our behavior, everything we do is on that term, on those terms, then we'll be quite eager. It's like we'll take instruction from anybody. It doesn't have to be that they are a devotee. We can take it from anybody. Even like Prabhupada gave that example when he was in America. In the early days, he was sick and he went to hospital. I think it was maybe a heart attack or something. And the doctor, it was some doctor who had been called in and he was drunk. He said you could still smell the alcohol off his breath. And he told him, you have to walk every day. And then he kind of stumbled out. And Prabhupada took that. He took that in there. So therefore, Prabhupada's morning walks, we've got those amazing lectures and exchanges with the devotees, and those morning walks have been taped. So Prabhupada used to walk every day on account of that, because he took it. This is Krishna telling me this is good for me. And he was thinking, this is good for this mission, so let me keep fit so that I can go and do that. So this is something we have to analyze ourselves. Is what I'm doing, is all the things that I'm doing and the way I'm approaching things favorable, or is it unfavorable? How can I improve on that? So this is possible in the association of devotees. If we simply keep the association of non-devotees, they won't remind us of Krishna. There may be, in material world, there can be society, friendship, and love, but these things are temporary. And we can't take shelter in those at the time of death. We can only take shelter in Krishna at the time of death. And the devotee sees Krishna coming. At the time of death, the devotee sees Krishna coming as in the form of liberation. But even before the end of this life, devotees become liberated by their engagement in Krishna consciousness. Jivan mukta sa uchate. We're not simply taking a gamble that perhaps at the end of this life I may get liberated. No, the end of this life already happened. We've left the life. We're in a new life. We're Vaikuntha people. This is what Prabhupada gave us. And just like we were reading in Prabhupada Lilamrita, he was encouraging the devotees to eat prasadam, because the devotees are giving up, they're accustomed to sense gratification, and they're giving up all that stuff. And Prabhupada knew all they have is prasadam, so let them eat as much as they like. In this way, they can satisfy any desires they have and become purified. There was one devotee, a Prabhupada disciple who lived here, Mother Ranjanini, very simple devotee, very pure-hearted person. And one of our godbrothers was visiting here at one time, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm having trouble, controlling my senses." And she said, "Is it prasadam you're eating?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, just eat your way back to Godhead." She didn't see it as a problem. And she was quite an amazing personality. There's a little book available about her called Simple for the Simple, isn't it? And a wonderful example of a devotee who Prabhupada mentions in Nectar of Devotion that a pure devotee doesn't like to remain idle. So what's the effect of the idle mind? Devil's workshop. Yeah. So therefore we always try to keep our mind engaged, so that mind can be engaged in different ways, by engaging our intelligence in Krishna consciousness, by engaging our working senses, etc. Engaging all the senses in Krishna service, Rishikesha, Rishikena, saving them back to Uchite. When we engage our mind and senses in the service of Rishikesh, the master of the senses, who's got complete control, then we also, our senses and mind become under control. And this is when our mind becomes our friend. So this place is mentioned as Hardwar, which is probably the anglified or anglicized version of Haridwar. And Dwar means gate, like Dwarka, Dwarkanath, and Ganga Dwar, Haridwar, the gate of Hari. So in other words, the gate to the spiritual world. This holy place is a gate to the spiritual world. And Prabhupada refers to that we didn't have a place there at that time, but we have Vrindavan and Mayapur, and these are actually more so valuable to the devotees, because these are the places of pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of his topmost pastimes. Therefore, for the devotees to go there satisfies any need to go anywhere else. What does it say that when we go to all these different places of pilgrimage, what do we gain? Well, that's there, yeah. But if we don't say, for example, one goes to many different places of pilgrimage, but they don't go to Vrindavan or Mayapur, then what do they gain from that? Does anyone remember? Say simply the trouble to get there. So, of course, these are pilgrimages, and they are places of pilgrimage, and they purify, etc. But Srila Prabhupada made it very simple. We don't have to go here, there, and everywhere. We don't have to do like the spiritual tourist thing. We can go to these places, if it helps our faith in Krishna consciousness, etc. But simply to go to the holy dam of Vrindavan, Sridham Mayapur, and inquire from the devotees there, hear from the devotees, offer some service, simply being that atmosphere. When you go to the holy dams, you put your hand in your bead bag. By the end of the day, you just realise, oh, I've done 40 rounds, 50 rounds, 60 rounds. It just happens. It's conducive for that. So these places are not places of the material world. They're not destroyed when the material world is destroyed. And similarly, all these ISKCON centers, they're like embassies of the spiritual world as well. Just like sometimes we have, like say, for example, in Scotland, they have, is it embassies they call them? Where you go there and it's basically their laws apply. It's an embassy, you call it, isn't it? So say you go to the American embassy in Scotland, as soon as you walk into that compound, then you're under the protection and direction and rules and terms of the American constitution or law or whatever. Or if you go to the Indian one, then it would be the same there. So similarly, when we come into the temple, of course, the Lord is not only in the temple, but especially for the devotees, we see the form of the Lord and we dedicate our activities to the Lord. So these temples are embassies of the spiritual world, and the devotees are the ambassadors of the spiritual world. So just like the ambassadors, say for example, the ambassador of America was going through Glasgow and they had a parking ticket, then he wouldn't have to pay a fine. It doesn't apply to him. So similarly, the devotees, they're coming out of the spiritual world and they're going out to give out Krishna consciousness, and people are out there thinking, oh, there's another person just like me, you know. They've got a car, they've got shoes. I remember one time I was doing book distribution in a place called Falkirk, and I was giving out Perfection of Yoga, and this so-called yogi came up to me and says, "You're not a yogi." I says, "Well, how do you figure that out?" He says, "Because you're wearing shoes." And it was Scotland in the middle of winter. It was just his conception, you know, of what yoga was all about. Obviously, he hadn't read the book. If he did, he must have read it with his eyes shut. Because he never learned anything from it. Yeah. So, but the devotees are engaging back to yoga here, wherever they go. When they go out from here, they're going out with a purpose. They're not like, okay, let's go into Glasgow and see how we can enjoy. They're going out there to give Krishna consciousness so that living entities can also learn how to enjoy. And then the idea is to put them in touch with the spiritual world through Prabhupada's books, through encouraging them to chant, giving donations. We use that in Krishna's service. They get benefited from it. Previous verse, Ajamil was referring to his pious and impious acts. So in the material world, this is what's happening. People are generally in Kali Yuga, it's impious acts, but occasionally they might do something pious. And even if they do everything pious, still they have to be they have to come back for the reaction. Simply avoiding impious acts is not enough. We have to stop both pious and impious acts because they're simply related to punishment and a reward for ourselves. That's all. It may benefit other people temporarily, but sometimes even people's idea to benefit others is binding for both parties. Charity in the mode of ignorance, it benefits neither the giver nor the receiver. So people need to read this Bhagavad Gita so they can understand how can they really benefit themselves. We're not sectarian. Prabhupada often would say that we're not sectarian. Sure, we chant Hare Krishna, we look a certain way, we chant certain prayers and all the rest of it. But if you look at the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, three modes of material nature, people can understand how to actually elevate themselves regardless of whatever their faith happens to be. So this is a science of self-realization, spiritual science. And Prabhupada was never in favor of rubber stamping yourself. Just even if you get a rubber stamp and you put some tilak on it, that doesn't just make us a devotee. Okay, I've got the clothes, I've got the markings, I've got this little dog collar here. Now I'm a devotee. I can just swan around. I'm the king of the castle. I know you karmis are the dirty wee rascals. So that's not the mood of the devotee. The devotee is thinking, there go I, but by the grace of God. That could be me again if I'm not careful. Spiritual life is like a razor's edge. When you're shaving, then maybe the ladies don't have much experience. I don't know, maybe some of you do, but generally if you're shaving, if you go the wrong way, generally you got to drag the blade across like that. And if you happen to go along, immediately there's a cut. So if you use or in the kitchen, you got a sharp knife. Blunt knives are actually more dangerous, they say. So because you can slip off and you're putting pressure on, and then you go somewhere else and cut yourself. So the sharp knife. But if you happen to, sharp knife is very good. But if actually you're inattentive, then sharp knife can be extremely dangerous. So therefore, we have to be attentive in our Krishna consciousness, attentive to these 10 offenses, I guess, the holy name, and attentive to our observing the proper etiquette in front of the deities. Don't take it for granted. We don't do certain things in front of the deities. If we do, then it means we're just saying, I don't believe the deity is really there. When we just act in such a way. Similar when we're not being attentive to the chanting of the holy name, we're thinking, well, I don't really believe that everything's going to come from the holy name. I think there's something else still for me in the material world. So, of course, we're conditioned, and it may take some time before we finally realize, okay, I have had it completely with the material world. Certain things we're done with the material world. We suffered with those, and we maybe seen others suffering with it. No, I'm not going to get into that. And we gave up certain things. But now what we really have to do is give up the desire to enjoy separately from Krishna. And the interesting thing is that by doing that and putting Krishna in the center, then we enjoy even more. It's like sometimes people are looking for respect, but by looking for respect, generally they get less respect because they demand it. And it usually means they upset people by that demanding respect, and therefore they get even less respect. But those who give respect, then they're the ones who actually earn respect as well. So it's one of those things that if you want it, best thing to do is stop wanting it and just give it. And these material desires, they're actually such a burden for the soul. We've been hijacked by the senses. The mind and senses, we let them go, and we've been hijacked by them, and we've been held. Soul's been held to ransom. Unless you do this, unless you do that, you're not going to be happy. So this is the ransoms we have to pay daily. But Ajamil here, very fortunate. He is, and for us also to see this, the value of a moment's association with the devotees, chanting. We've seen often, if we look at Prabhupada's life, someone would come into Prabhupada's association, it'd be life-changing for them. And this is the same for us. We read Prabhupada's books, we read these wonderful teachings, we get involved in some kirtan, it can be life-changing. I remember once, I've mentioned before, that I was in India and I visited the ISKCON Delhi temple. It was a Sunday program, and there was a temple was full, big temple, and it was full of devotees, practically shoulder to shoulder. And they were all, at that time, they were all sitting on the floor chanting kirtan, and a few devotees were up dancing. And I stayed for a bit, and it was such an amazing atmosphere. I was thinking, this temple is just such a great example of Krishna consciousness, because if people come in, they will become convinced simply by the atmosphere. The philosophy will be there, the prasadam will be there, etc. But simply being in the atmosphere of the devotees, they'll become convinced that there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere better to go. And you can see that for those who were visiting for the weekend, this was the highlight of the week for them. They were eager to come to the temple. So this is the mood of the devotee as well, is we want to increase our eagerness for Krishna consciousness. It's quite sad if we're eager for something material, because that's going to be some temporary thing which is going to go in due course of time. So we find ourselves attracted by material things. We have to figure out how we're going to turn that around so we can become attracted to Krishna. And this is what Ajamil did here. He was mentioning that he was attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the lucid energy in the form of a woman. So for him, that was his Maya. We all have different types of Maya. I remember one devotee, everybody here knows the term bloop. Anybody not know what bloop means? We all know. Okay, if you don't know, then you can just imagine. Or I'll tell you then if you don't know. Basically, ISKCON is like a ship. Prabhupada is the captain of the ship, and that ship is going back to Godhead. Sometimes on the ship there can be some waves, and have you ever been on a ship and felt seasick? Once I went on a crossing to the Isle of Man, and it usually takes a couple of hours. It took 6 hours. It was such waves were up and down, and everybody was throwing up everywhere. And and sometimes Prabhupada mentions that when it gets rough, sometimes people become a bit mad with seasickness, and they think, this boat is causing so much trouble, let me jump off. So when they jump off and they hit the water and it goes bloop. So this is called blooping. So blooping means giving up the shelter of this Krishna consciousness society of devotees, the practice of Krishna consciousness, Krishna, the spiritual master, etc. So sometimes it may be rough in devotional life because we're going through an artha nivritti, we're in the material world, but don't be tempted, don't be just fooled into thinking jumping off the boat is the solution. Because simply it won't be. And what was the point I was going to make with that? Yeah. So sometimes the things that devotees would bloop for, it would be like, what, you bloop for that? Like one devotee blooped to play computer games. And, for someone else, it's like, if you're going to bloop, at least bloop for something substantial, But then another devotee would bloop for that, and then think, well, why would you bloop for that, So, in other words, one devotee's Maya, it may seem nothing to us, but it's very important to them. And they're very attached to it. So it's easy for us to say, people, why are you doing that? Just give it up. And if they say, well, why are you doing that? Just give it up. You're like, how dare you? This is my most dear attachment. So this is the direction of the Shastra, that whatever is most dear to us, if we give it up for the service of Krishna, then it qualifies us for eternal life. So giving that up may mean physically giving something up, or giving up the desire for it, or utilizing Krishna's service so that we then become free from the desire of what it's going to bring us. So the material sense objects, giving up them is one thing, but to give up the subtle things like desire for fame, adoration, and gain, these are like the subtle aspects of sex life. We want to be recognized as something distinct, even within the society of devotees. So we also have to keep refocusing our attention to becoming Dasa, or Dasi. So this is our constant focus and refocus. And the association of devotees is a perfect place to do that. This creates a conducive atmosphere. And we'll just finish with a story which many of you have heard before, which when Prabhupada visited London in the days of the Bury Place Temple in London, he arrived in London. At the airport, his luggage didn't arrive with him. Indrajumna Maharaj had to stay behind and wait for the luggage and fill out forms and all the rest of it. Just like our devotee here, Pradyumna Prabhu, he arrived in Scotland recently and his luggage didn't arrive with him, and it can be a bit of a nuisance. We can experience that. But so, but because Prabhupada had speaking engagement, etc., there was a festival planned, so the devotees all took Prabhupada to the temple. They had great kirtan, lecture, feast, everything. Then finally, very late at night, Indrajumna Maharaj had retrieved Srila Prabhupada's luggage, and he went to Prabhupada's rooms in Bury Place, which was a few flights up. So he was very tired. He was feeling dejected. He'd missed the kirtan, he'd missed the feast, and he had missed Prabhupada's lecture. And he got in and he put Prabhupada's luggage and he paid the obeisances. And Prabhupada went over, and as he was paying his obeisances, Prabhupada slapped him in the back and said, in the material world, it's very difficult to be a devotee. But when you go back home to Godhead, it's very easy because everyone's a devotee. And he felt like he got even more mercy than what he had if he had stayed at the rest of the program. So this is an indication for us that it is difficult to be a devotee in the material world. If we're simply looking for some easy way out all the time, then we'll come across some difficulties. And if we avoid it, it's not that we go looking for difficulties, but when they come, if our intention is to do something for Krishna, or if our direction have been given is to do something for Krishna, then it's not always difficult. Now I stop. Prabhupada says, devotional service begins when things become difficult. So of course it's all devotional service, but when things become difficult, then we really have to pray. We have to take shelter in other devotees. It's like, oh Prabhu, how do I do this? Not like, I don't know how to do it, so it can't be done. Well, I can't do it. Well, that's just, what about asking someone else who may have done it before? And there's so many experienced devotees in ISKCON that whatever we have to surrender to, someone's been there before us and they can tell us what to do. This is the Association of Devotees. And we can learn so many wonderful things. Before we came to ISKCON, then so many things we didn't know what to do. And Krishna's given us so many skills. And we learn how to do things like Jadu Rani. She couldn't paint to save herself, but Prabhupada says, paint for Krishna. Now she's become one of Krishna's most famous artists. So Krishna can make up for what we lack. And therefore, we just try to fulfill the orders of the spiritual master, and do our best to do that. And try doesn't mean, oh, I tried, and as soon as it's a little difficult, I gave it up. That's not trying. That's using the word try as an excuse just to make it seem as if we actually tried. Try means we keep endeavoring. Determination and mode of goodness, we don't give up. We try this. If that doesn't work, we try that. We try this. And this was Prabhupada's mood as well, is that when the devotees were going out on the streets chanting or selling the books, they'd go to Prabhupada and say, what about this method? What about that? And he'd say, try it, try it, try it. So the main thing is that we simply bear in mind what is our mission, and we adopt the mood of the Stita Di Muni, which is to always agitating our mind as to think of new ways to spread Krishna consciousness, or think of new ways to get the message over to people, and not be attached to like a particular type of program. So by his association of devotees, he detached himself from material conception of life, engaged in devotional service, and he didn't waste any time. He simply went to the place of pilgrimage, so that he could be in the association of devotees, be in a place which is conducive for performing devotional service. And so that place is not necessarily a geographical place, but it's an association of devotees. This is where you'll find the devotees in holy places, like House Road, Lismahego, Soho Street, London, and places like that. Okay, any comments or questions? Huh? Okay.
They asked Srila Prabhupada what happens in some of these Krishna consciousnesses in the early days. Srila Prabhupada said, well, they fall back into the ocean of material suffering. And so there was a devotee there, he decided he was going to leave. He just walked out from that door, Brahmana, throwing a stone in the water.
Oh.
So then Srila Prabhupada said, well, where is so-and-so? And they said, oh, he moved. And Srila Prabhupada said, what's moved? And they said, he fell back into the ocean of material suffering. Srila Prabhupada said, yes, he moved. That's how moved we can understand. And then when you were saying about people leaving because of different desires or whatever, they had a cook in San Diego, and we used to get these big trucks full of government surplus flour, sugar, and he would have to unload those by himself. So he just said, I'm not going to do this. This is just too hard. I'm out of here. So he left. And then he got a job at a construction site unloading bags.
He didn't know what he was due to do. Yeah, interesting that. Thank you for that. It's interesting that also the non-devotees use this term bloop as well. Yeah, if like say they're making a cake or something and it blooped, or if they're doing a film, they have a blooper reel, which is when the scenes which didn't make it in because somebody burst out laughing in the middle of their lines or something. So I don't know whether they got that from the devotees or what, but there's a lot of things actually permeating into society which were from the devotee lingo, and the devotees have such an influence. So yes, it's very interesting how Prabhupada would accept different terminologies that the devotees come up with. Yes, he is blooped. Anything else? Anybody? Iskon Guru Govinda ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.
Haribol. Jai.
Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki.